Just a few years after the Medici Palace was completed, and only a few blocks away, one of the other wealthiest families in Florence built a palace.
Well, there's a whole boom in palace building after the Medici built their palace. And so we're looking at the Palazzo Rucellai, whose architect was the famous Alberti. Now, Alberti was a brilliant humanist. He wrote an important book on architecture in addition to his famous book on painting.
Alberti's On Architecture is probably the most important treatise on architecture after the 10 books of architecture by the ancient Roman Vitruvius.
Right, which had only been discovered a few decades earlier. So there's this whole revival of ancient Roman architecture. And we see that a little bit in the Medici Palace, but we see it really here in the Rucellai Palace by Alberti.
What's fascinating is that Alberti is looking back to Vitruvius's ancient work, seeing this standardized vocabulary and employing it in a self-conscious way that is announcing its historicism.
Announcing it's looking back to ancient Roman architecture. Alberti had been in Rome, he had studied ancient Roman architecture.
And the classicism is not coming through only in the individual elements, but also in the emphasis on measure and harmony. Giovanni Rucellai came from a wealthy Florentine family of wool manufacturers.
Like most wealthy Florentines, that's how they made their money.
At this particular moment in Florentine history, it was important that Rucellai express his loyalty to the Medici family. Alberti was clearly referencing the Medici Palace, and you can see that in the organization of the facade into 3 primary stories. But there are also really important differences, and you can see that especially in the masonry. For example, this building is much more delicate. Gone is that heavy, dark, rusticated masonry that we saw in the earlier building.
Right, that gave the impression of the Medici Palace as being almost like a fortress and recalling the Palazzo Vecchio.
This building feels much more intellectual in its geometry, its lightness, its sense of the cerebral.
So we see more classical elements here than we saw in the Medici Palace. We have pilasters, rounded arches, although we did see that also in the Medici Palace. But in between the stories, instead of just a string course, we have a classical entablature, which gives us a sense of horizontality and which is filled with decorative patterns. Between the ground floor and the first floor, we see the Medici device of a diamond ring with 3 feathers coming out of it. And between the second floor and the third floor, we see a device of the Rucellai family of a sail that appears to be blowing in the wind.
If you start at the bottom, just like the Medici Palace, there are benches on the ground floor, which is an invitation for the citizens of the city to come and rest.
So the ground floor very much feels like the ground floor. It has a sense of weightiness that comes from that diamond pattern.
And as you move up the facade, there are 3 sets of pilasters, each with different capitals. At the bottom, you see variations of the Tuscan tradition, sort of the simplest, heaviest. Above that, a form of the Ionic. And then at the top, Corinthian.
And we see that differentiation of orders also if we go to the Colosseum in Rome, where at the bottom we have the Tuscan, the middle story is decorated with the Ionic order, and at the top with the Corinthian. So Alberti is clearly looking at ancient Roman architecture.
But the building's emphasis is not vertical, even though you've got the pilasters moving from top to bottom, because those pilasters are interrupted by these very elaborate entablatures that really emphasize the horizontality, the grounded quality of the building.
Now, the building was never finished. About 2/3 of what Alberti intended is there. And you can see it's unfinished on the right side, and so there would have been a third entrance.
Alberti did more than simply the facade. The structure was remodeled on the inside, joining a number of pre-existing independent structures.
Now, Alberti may also have designed the loggia that is catty-cornered to the palazzo, to the palace. This is an open space with round arches, beautiful columns with Corinthian capitals, and pilasters on the interior wall, also very classicizing. And this loggia may, in fact, have been built to commemorate a wedding between a member of the Medici family and the Rucellai family, so a joining of these 2 powerful Florentine families.
Actually, it's important to note that it's no longer an open loggia. It's now got a glass covering, and it's actually a shoe store. But originally, it would have been an open space that would have protected people as they walked through, and reminds us that even the palace is seen as a kind of civic good, that this was adding to the beauty and the harmony of the city.
Well, we can see the building of the palazzo, of the loggia, of this piazza in front as part of the beautification of the city that happened in the 15th century. That civic pride that led the people of Florence to be interested in beautifying their city with great works of sculpture and architecture.
So here in the middle of the 15th century, in the center of Florence, we have this invention of what humanism looks like applied to domestic architecture.